The late afternoon sky hung heavy with swollen charcoal grey storm clouds, swallowing every warm streak of golden sunlight that might have spilled over the sprawling glass windows of the open-concept kitchen inside Azure Heights residences. Chloe Hale stood frozen at the cold quartz countertop, her wrist throbbing raw and numb after hours of gripping an electric hand mixer. The stainless steel mixing bowl at her elbow held a wrecked batch of egg-white meringue. What should have been light, billowy clouds had deflated completely, thin, watery sludge pooling at the bottom, every tiny air bubble dissipating bit by bit. It was a perfect, cruel metaphor for the 3 hollow, suffocating years she'd spent trapped in a loveless sham marriage. Outwardly polished and affluent, her life inside was cracked to the core, fragile enough to crumble at the slightest touch. Her smartphone rested idle along the counter's edge, the tinny, snitching tone of Ethan Voss's personal assistant still echoing faintly through the device's lingering call audio. The man had feigned reluctant hesitation over the line, yet every syllable dripped with undisguised glee, desperate to relay gossip he knew would cut Chloe deep. "Miss Hale, I truly hate to break this news ahead of Mr. Voss's own announcement, but Ms. Ivy Mercer landed at the international airport this afternoon. Mr. Voss has leased a luxury downtown high-rise for her exclusive use, purchased lifetime memberships to every elite private club in the city, and restructured the entire resource pipeline of Voss Industries to prioritize Ivy's every need moving forward." Chloe stared blankly at the ruined meringue, no sharp, searing wave of heartbreak crashing over her frame. Instead, a thick, suffocating blanket of numb apathy wrapped around her limbs and settled heavy in her chest. She had anticipated this inevitable day for more than 1,000 sleepless nights spent trapped inside a home designed entirely around another woman's preferences, each quiet evening a fresh reminder that she existed only as a disposable stand-in for the girl Ethan had obsessed over since their adolescent years. Unbidden, vivid memories crashed down on her, reopening the oldest, rawest scar etched into the back of her mind, the desperate, hopeless stretch of her early 20s that had led her straight into Ethan's transactional marriage proposal. Her father's construction firm had collapsed overnight beneath a mountain of unpaid commercial loans, and a sudden, brutal, acute heart attack had landed him in the ICU's critical care ward. The daily hospital bills stacked higher than any sum Chloe could ever scrape together working minimum-wage part shifts at a neighborhood cafe. Family relatives had turned their backs without a single offer of aid. Old college friends vanished entirely from her contact list, and she'd found herself stranded alone in the cold hospital hallway, penniless to afford even the cheapest pre-packaged sandwich from the lobby vending machine. She'd clung to the chipped plastic hospital railing, drowning in the paralyzing certainty that she would watch her father slip away for lack of money to fund his life-saving treatment. That was the exact moment Ethan Voss had cut through the sterile grey hospital bustle and stepped into her line of sight. Clad in a bespoke Italian wool suit, a limited-edition platinum watch glinting cold against his wrist, he carried an aura of untouchable old-money privilege that repelled nearly every stranger who crossed his path. His gaze locked onto her gaunt, tear-streaked face and froze entirely, as if he was staring straight through her skin to glimpse a ghost he'd spent a decade fruitlessly chasing down. He'd spoken in a flat, unyielding tone laced with quiet condescension, tossing out a transaction disguised as a lifeline. "Marry me," he'd said plainly, "and every cent of your father's medical bills will be covered in full. You'll hold full residence rights to any Voss-owned property you like, never lacking food or luxury. But remember your place. You are nothing more than a substitute. Do not grow foolish enough to crave anything that belongs to Ivy Mercer. Do not imagine you could ever replace her." Back then, crippling desperation had clouded every ounce of Chloe's better judgment. tangled together with a fragile, naive flicker of foolish hope. She'd convinced herself that consistent, gentle devotion might chip away the cold wall Ethan had built around his heart for Ivy. If she molded every fragment of her personality to match his vague, distant memories of his lost sweetheart, stayed docile and obliging, tended to every household chore without complaint, surely he would one day truly see Chloe Hale, not just a cheap carbon copy of the woman he longed for. 3 years of self-erasure had shattered every last thread of that childish, hollow fantasy. White tulips, Ivy's favorite floral bloom, cluttered the entry console, living room coffee table, and master bedroom vanity non-stop, even though Chloe suffered from severe, chronic hay fever that left her coughing and congested for weeks each spring. When she'd begged Ethan to swap them for milder, hypoallergenic blooms, he'd only shrugged dismissively and told her to endure the discomfort. Ivy would expect to see them the second she returned home. Half of the master walk-in closet sat perpetually empty, stocked floor to ceiling with unworn designer dresses, sized and styled exclusively to fit Ivy's frame, garments Ethan had purchased years prior in blind anticipation of her homecoming. Countless nights, Ethan stumbled home, dead drunk from corporate charity galas, his arms looping tight around Chloe's waist, while he mumbled Ivy's name on repeat into her hair, his voice soft with a longing he never spared for his legal wife. The instant morning light seeped through the bedroom curtains and sobered him. He would yank himself away without a single word of apology, his expression hard and distant, as if holding her had left a bitter, unpleasant taste in his mouth. Over those 3 long years, Chloe had stripped away every fragment of her own identity to mirror Ivy's supposed gentle aesthetic. She'd abandoned her lifelong passion for bold, textured oil painting to spend hours copying soft, muted watercolor landscapes that matched Ivy's favored art style. She'd given up her love of rich, spicy home cooking to slave over bland, delicate French small plates each evening, catering to a palate that was never truly Ethan's to begin with. All of her bright, striking casual wear had been donated to local thrift shops. Her wardrobe shrank down to a monotonous rotation of pale beige and soft grey linen dresses, crafted to blend into the background at every corporate dinner Ethan dragged her to. She'd poured every ounce of her heart into a one-sided love affair with a man who only glanced at her when he wanted to pretend his lost white moonlight was within arm's reach. Now that the real Ivy had touched down in the city, Chloe's sole purpose as a counterfeit had expired entirely. Chloe reached forward and switched off the electric mixer, scraping the worthless deflated meringue straight into the stainless steel kitchen trash bin. The collapsed, wrinkled vanilla soufflé baking inside the oven followed seconds later, its misshapen form landing heavily on a ceramic platter that clinked hollow against the countertop. She tugged soft cotton oven mitts off her chilled fingertips and set them aside, her gaze drifting down the carpeted hallway toward the private home office. Rested flat on the solid oak desk sat a 2-page divorce agreement she'd drafted that afternoon, every legal clause cross-referenced and double-checked for hours on end. Every asset linked to Ethan's fortune, real estate, stock portfolios, luxury jewelry, imported designer accessories, was explicitly signed away in the fine print. She intended to walk out of Azure Heights with nothing but her own personal belongings, no cash settlements, no vehicle titles, no high-end decor to claim. All she craved was a clean, unburdened exit from the gilded cage that had trapped her for 3 miserable years. She padded quietly down the hall and stepped into the office, her fingertips brushing lightly over the black printed ink of the document as she stared it down. There was no sorrow coiling in her chest, only a strange, weightless relief, like a heavy stone she'd carried for years, had finally slid off her ribs. She did not want screaming fights or messy, tearful pleas for mercy, nor did she intend to demand financial compensation for the years she'd wasted. All she desired was quiet, dignified separation, to leave the high-rise complex and never look back. The sharp metallic twist of the front door's lock cut through the apartment's stillness, and Chloe lifted her head to watch Ethan stride into the open-concept living room. He tossed his cashmere overcoat carelessly across the leather sectional sofa, and a cloying, overly sweet jasmine floral perfume washed over the space, starkly clashing with the crisp cedar cologne he wore every single day, without exception. The sickly sweet scent pricked at her sinuses, stirring a faint wave of nausea low in her stomach. On every other evening he returned from work, Ethan's features were weighed down by the exhaustion of high-stakes corporate negotiations, his glances toward Chloe sharp and impatient, barely masking his quiet indifference. Tonight, however, his eyes glowed with a light, unbridled glee she had never once seen directed at her, a soft, unconscious smile tugging at the corners of his jaw. He barely spared a passing glance for the wilted white tulips resting on the dining table, flowers that usually earned him a sharp, annoyed frown when they lost their freshness, and wandered leisurely toward the kitchen doorway where Chloe stood waiting. "Ivy's home," he said casually, loosening the knot of his silk tie without a single glance her way, as if he was commenting on the trivial forecast for tomorrow's weather, rather than the woman who had dictated every cruel rule of their marriage for 3 full years. "I heard," Chloe replied, her tone flat, devoid of any trace of hurt, anger, or longing, as she turned to gather the signed divorce papers from the office desk. Ethan stepped forward until his chest hovered inches from her back, his warm palm settling uninvited around her slender waist. The touch had once sent wild, fluttering heartbeats racing through Chloe's chest in the earliest days of their marriage, back when she'd foolishly clung to any tiny scrap of his attention as a precious gift. Now, every nerve in her body tensed on instinct, a cold prickle of revulsion crawling up her spine, and she fought the natural urge to jerk away from his grasp entirely. "Behave yourself for the next several months," he ordered, his voice cool and authoritative, lacking even a flicker of consideration for her emotions. Ivy's readjusting to life stateside after a decade abroad. She's sensitive and easily overwhelmed by unfamiliar surroundings. Every little detail needs to cater to her comfort while she searches for a standalone property to purchase. Chloe did not bother asking how many months several entailed, nor did she waste breath demanding why she was expected to step aside and cater to the woman Ethan had loved long before he'd ever laid eyes on her. 3 years of swallowing unspoken resentment had drained every ounce of fight from her throat, leaving no energy left for pointless arguments that would only fall on deaf, unfeeling ears. She shifted gently out of his loose hold and turned to retrieve the finalized divorce papers alongside a black fountain pen from the office, extending both items level between their bodies. "Sign these." The faint, pleased smile on Ethan's face dissolved in an instant, vanishing like smoke caught in a breeze. His gaze dropped hard onto the bold, printed title, "Divorce Agreement," emblazoned across the top page, then shot back upward to lock onto her face, a tangled mixture of absurd disbelief and hot, wounded anger swirling deep in his irises. His fingers curled tight at his sides, refusing to reach out and accept the documents, a cold, mocking smirk tugging at the edge of his lips as icy, unsparing eyes bore straight into her soul. "What is this childish tantrum supposed to mean?" "Take it at face value," Chloe answered, lifting her chin to hold his stare without a single flinch or glance away. "Ms. Ivy Mercer has returned to the city, so I am voluntarily stepping back from this marriage. I will walk away with zero claim to any Voss family assets, signing every property and financial waiver necessary to exit Azure Heights without a cent to my name." Those exact words had been thrown at her 3 years prior, The night Ethan had proposed, that miserable transaction of a marriage. He'd leaned lazily against the hospital room doorframe back then, his gaze cold and dismissive as he sized up her broken, desperate form. "Chloe Hale," he'd warned flatly, "remember this, you hold nothing more than the hollow title of Mrs. Voss. Do not entertain delusions of owning anything that belongs to me or to Ivy." She had memorized that cruel line word for word, replaying it alone on countless sleepless nights. Ethan stared at her unwavering, calm profile for more than 10 full seconds, the only sound filling the empty kitchen, the faint, distant hum of the range hood's residual fan. The silence stretched taut, suffocating, until he suddenly let out a low, bitter chuckle that cut through the quiet like shards of broken glass. That laugh dripped with unfiltered, scathing contempt, a thin blade carving away the last shred of fragile dignity Chloe had managed to cling to in his presence. He shot one hand forward in a violent, snatching motion, gripping both edges of the printed legal papers hard between his palms. A shrill, tearing crack split the air of the spacious kitchen as he ripped the 2-page document clean down the middle, splitting it into jagged, useless fragments. The torn paper fluttered down to land scattered across the cool tile floor at Chloe's feet. "You dare to speak of divorce?" Ethan advanced a single long stride, towering over her smaller frame as his cold fingers shot upward to clamp tight around her delicate jawbone, squeezing hard enough to send sharp, stabbing pain radiating up toward her temples. He forced her chin upward to lock their gazes together, rage and confused frustration boiling thick in his pupils. "Do you honestly not grasp your own station in this life? You are nothing but a cheap replica I've funded and sheltered under my roof, a disposable ornament to fill the empty space left by Ivy's absence. Now that the real woman has come home, you throw a fit and demand to walk out. Do you imagine I'd fall for such transparent, attention-seeking antics?" The icy chill of his skin seeped straight through her flesh and into her bones, and Chloe's eyes stung with the threat of suppressed tears. A dull, familiar ache throbbed deep in her heart, yet the sensation was buried beneath a far heavier blanket of numbing resignation. She bit down hard on her lower lip, forcing every glistening droplet of moisture back into her tear ducts, refusing to show him even a flicker of vulnerable weakness. "Or have you conveniently forgotten how you would have collapsed without my financial support 3 years ago?" Ethan lowered his voice to a menacing, silky murmur, his breath fanning hot against her cheek as he leaned in closer, every word a deliberate stab to her self-worth. "Without me footing your father's medical bills, you would have lost everything. No roof over your head, no means to survive on your own. What right do you possess to dictate the start or end of this arrangement? The power to decide always rests with me." Chloe's shoulders trembled as she strained against his brutal grip, every small shift of her skull amplifying the sharp agony shooting through her jawline. She fought to steady her wavering tone, her voice quiet yet unshakable as she corrected his false framing of their relationship. "This is not a request for discussion. This is a formal notice, Ethan Voss. I am finished acting out this hollow, performative companionship you've forced me to endure." "Performative companionship?" Ethan barked a harsh, mocking laugh, releasing her jaw with such brutal force that the momentum sent Chloe stumbling backward 2 unsteady paces. Her lower spine crashed hard against the rigid cold marble edge of the kitchen counter, a dull, bruising pain shooting up her spinal column that made her entire frame shudder involuntarily. He stepped back half a pace to smooth the wrinkles out of his rumpled dress shirt cuff, his expression devoid of any hint of remorse or sympathy. "The beginning and end of this marriage lie entirely within my control. You do not get to throw childish tantrums and rewrite the rules on a whim." Without another glance in her direction, he pivoted on his heel and marched toward the entryway. He paused at the heavy wooden front door, casting a cold, icy half-profile over his shoulder to hurl one final unfeeling statement into the silent kitchen. Until Ivy finds a permanent private residence and adjusts to city life, she will be moving into this apartment alongside you. Maintain perfect, unobtrusive compliance and do nothing to upset her. Or I will cut off every financial lifeline I've extended to you these past 3 years. The massive oak front door slammed shut with an earth-shaking crash, the metallic lock clicking sharply into place a heartbeat later. That single sound landed like a heavy sledgehammer against the fragile remnants of hope Chloe had still foolishly clung to deep in her chest. The entire high-rise fell dead silent after the violent slam, only the distant, muffled roar of downtown highway traffic drifting through the double-paned windows to break the oppressive quiet. Chloe sank slowly to her knees on the cold tile flooring, her trembling fingers reaching down to gather the jagged scraps of the torn divorce agreement scattered around her sneakers. The sharp, rough edge of one paper fragment sliced open the pad of her index finger, a tiny bead of bright red welling up on the pale skin. The minor cut barely registered to her senses. The crushing, suffocating agony coiled tight around her heart was 1,000,000 times more unbearable than any superficial flesh wound could ever be. She knelt there for a long stretch of time, staring blankly down at the crumpled white paper littered across the floor, a bitter, silent huff of laughter huffing past her lips. Even the simple act of ending their toxic union had devolved into a humiliating, messy spectacle. There was no dignity left for her to claim in this space, not after 3 years of playing second fiddle to a ghost. Tears had long since dried up inside her during the countless lonely, sleepless evenings spent waiting for Ethan to return home to an empty, cold apartment. Every painful memory paraded unbidden across the back of her eyelids in rapid succession, her father's near-fatal hospital stay and her crippling helplessness. The home decorated top to bottom around Ivy's tastes, drunken nights where he whispered another woman's name against her skin, only to push her away at dawn. The endless white tulips triggering her chronic allergies that he dismissed as trivial discomfort. The way she'd abandoned her artistic passions and reshaped her entire personality, just to earn a scrap of fleeting approval from a man who would never care for her truly. Her heart resembled that failed batch of meringue she'd wasted earlier that evening, slowly cooled, deflated, stripped of all light and possibility after years of neglect and deliberate disregard. She was nothing more than an empty storage vessel for Ethan's unrequited longing, and now that the original object of his fixation had returned, the vessel was destined to be discarded without a second thought. Chloe rose slowly to her feet, brushing fine dust off the knees of her linen house dress as she tidied the kitchen's scattered baking supplies with slow, mechanical movements. The ruined soufflé and torn paper scraps both went into the large kitchen trash bin, and once every surface was wiped clean, she turned and climbed the curved spiral staircase leading to the second-floor master bedroom. This room had technically been hers for 3 full years, yet it had never once felt like a genuine home, every decorative choice dictated by Ivy's preferred aesthetic. Cream-colored wallpaper lined the walls, soft, neutral throw rugs covered the hardwood floors, and every piece of furniture featured the muted, delicate lines the absent woman favored. There was not a single object in the room that reflected Chloe's genuine taste or personal joy. Half the walk-in closet remained empty, stocked with Ivy's unworn clothing. The vanity counter held foreign skincare brands and poetry collections the other girl supposedly loved, none of which Chloe had ever touched or enjoyed. Her personal belongings fit neatly inside a 28-inch rolling suitcase, a surprisingly small collection after 3 years of residence. A handful of simple cotton and linen dresses, affordable drugstore skincare bottles, 3 half-finished textbooks on oil painting technique, and an old locked metal tin box tucked at the bottom of the closet that held the only surviving photograph of her late mother, her last genuine link to the happy life she'd lost before meeting Ethan. She knelt beside the wardrobe and folded each garment with gentle, deliberate motions, her mind quiet and untroubled as she prepared to leave everything behind. Midway through packing, her cell phone buzzed against the nightstand, the screen lighting up with an unlabeled 10-digit number she could recite from memory without a moment's hesitation. Her fingers hesitated for a split second before she lifted the device to her ear, pressing the answer button softly against her temple. A deep, velvety male timbre filtered through the speaker, layered with lazy, amused amusement that carried a faint static hum from the phone's cellular connection. Words reached me that Ethan Voss's long-lost Ivy Mercer has flown back into town. "Mr. Thorne," Chloe replied quietly, drawing the zipper closed on her packed suitcase as she spoke. Silas Thorne was the ruthless CEO of Thorne Global Enterprises, Ethan's fiercest, most unyielding rival in every major commercial sector of the city. Rumors swirled endlessly around Silas's reputation: sharp, unforgiving business tactics, a cold, unpredictable temperament, zero mercy for competitors like Voss Industries. Ethan ranted and raved about Silas non-stop during corporate dinners, his voice thick with bitter resentment and unmasked fear, always ordering his staff to avoid any interaction with the Thorne conglomerate at all costs. "I suspect you've found yourself stuck between a rock and a hard place right now," Silas continued, without waiting for her longer response, his tone direct and uncomplicated. "I can offer you a place to stay that will drive Ethan absolutely wild with frustration. The top-floor penthouse unit at Nova Sky, directly across the street from Azure Heights, just transferred fully to my name this morning." Chloe crossed to the floor-to-ceiling bedroom window and tugged one edge of the heavy blackout curtain aside, her gaze drifting across the 6-lane thoroughfare, separating the 2 luxury residential towers. The Nova Sky penthouse windows glowed with warm amber lamplight that evening, a tall, broad male silhouette faintly visible standing behind the glass panes overlooking the downtown skyline. "That top-floor penthouse unit belongs to you?" she asked softly, a flicker of uncertainty stirring in her chest. Aligning herself with Silas Thorne meant stepping into dangerous, uncharted territory, but remaining at Azure Heights to watch Ethan play house with Ivy every single day promised a far more suffocating, agonizing existence than any risk the rival CEO might present. "All paperwork finalized earlier today," Silas chuckled lowly through the phone receiver, his tone easy and unburdened. "Panoramic city and river views, perfect for watching petty domestic dramas unfold from a comfortable distance." "What would the monthly rent amount to?" Chloe inquired logically, unwilling to accept a handout that would saddle her with an unpayable debt to one of the city's most powerful tycoons. "Money's an awkward barrier between 2 people with a shared enemy," Silas drawled leisurely. "Consider it complimentary temporary housing for someone left with nowhere to go. Think of it as a minor advance on the long-term advantages I'll gain by throwing Ethan Voss off balance." Chloe fell silent for 30 full seconds, weighing every possible outcome in her mind before delivering her quiet, definitive answer. "I'll move there tonight." Refreshingly straightforward, Silas sounded genuinely pleased by her agreement. "I'll text the 6-digit entry passcode to your phone within the minute. Would you like a security team to assist with transporting your luggage? We could time the move perfectly so Ethan witnesses you walking out with your suitcase." "There's no need for orchestrated spectacle," Chloe declined gently. "I'll handle my own relocation without outside interference." She ended the call after exchanging a brief farewell, hoisting the heavy suitcase's hard plastic handle in one hand and casting one final, hollow glance around the cold, impersonal bedroom before easing the wooden door shut behind her. As she passed the closed master study further down the hallway, a thin gap beneath the door let Ethan's soft, doting voice drift out into the corridor. He was speaking to Ivy over the phone, every syllable saturated with a tenderness he had never once directed toward Chloe in 3 years of marriage. "I've taken care of every detail for you, my love," he purred into the receiver. "The secondary bedroom off the master suite at Azure Heights has been fully renovated to your exact design specifications. This will be your permanent home for as long as you'd like. I'll pick you up at the airport at dawn tomorrow, then take you to the most exclusive French fine dining restaurant downtown for your first evening back in the city." Chloe's eyes grew dull, every last faint spark of foolish hope snuffed out entirely as she listened to his saccharine devotion for another woman. She lowered her head and gripped the suitcase's metal pull bar tighter, walking steadily toward the building's central elevator bank. While waiting for the car to descend to the lobby, she opened a moving service app on her phone and scheduled a pickup for the following morning to haul all furniture and decor Ethan had purchased for the apartment, none of which she intended to claim as her own property. Next, she navigated her contact list and mass deleted every saved photograph, text thread, and phone number linked to Ethan Voss, severing every digital thread connecting her to the painful chapter of her past life. The elevator's automatic glass doors slid open to reveal the residential lobby, cool evening river breeze sweeping in through the main entrance as Chloe stepped outside onto the concrete sidewalk. She paused for a single heartbeat to glance back up at the towering glass and steel Azure Heights complex that had trapped her for 3 years, then turned without hesitation and crossed the multi-lane street toward the rival Nova Sky residential high-rise. She scanned her temporary access card at the front security gate, rode the private express elevator straight to the penthouse floor, and typed the 6-digit code Silas had sent into the smart lock mounted on the front door. A soft digital beep echoed as the mechanism unlocked, swinging inward to reveal the spacious flat. The penthouse featured a minimalist black, white, and grey modern interior design scheme, vast open living space stretching out before her, and an unbroken wall of floor-to-ceiling windows framing the entire downtown skyline and winding river far below. The air carried a faint, clean scent of cedarwood diffuser, mixed with the subtle, lingering sharp tang of fresh paint, confirming Silas had only just completed the property transfer and hadn't occupied the space for long. A tailored black wool suit jacket lay casually draped over the sectional leather sofa, and a half-empty crystal tumbler of whiskey sat abandoned on the stone coffee counter, ice cubes fully melted and diluted at the bottom of the glass. Silas himself was nowhere to be seen inside the unit. Chloe set her suitcase down against one wall of the living room and wandered over to the massive window wall, pressing her palm lightly against the cool glass surface. From this vantage point, she could clearly make out the lit master bedroom window of her old apartment across the roadway, warm yellow light spilling outward that had once signified a place she'd mistakenly hoped to call home. She stood staring at the view for several quiet minutes before reaching for the heavy blackout curtain cord and drawing the fabric closed, cutting off visual contact with her former life entirely. Starting that very night, Chloe Hale's existence would no longer revolve around playing a counterfeit lover for a man who had never valued her worth. The days spent living in the Nova Sky penthouse unfolded far more peacefully than Chloe had anticipated. Silas traveled constantly for cross-country and international corporate negotiations, rarely present at the residential tower. On the rare occasions they crossed paths inside the elevator or shared the top-floor hallway, they exchanged nothing more than polite, brief nods of acknowledgement, never pressing for details about each other's private lives. This comfortable, unpressured distance allowed Chloe's frayed, overtaxed nervous system to slowly unwind after 3 years of constant emotional strain at Azure Heights. 3 days after her move, Chloe landed a full-time position as curatorial assistant at Lumina Fine Arts Gallery, a small, independent exhibition space downtown focused on emerging local painters. The monthly salary was modest, barely covering basic groceries and incidental living expenses, yet the role fulfilled the artistic dream she'd been forced to abandon during her marriage to Ethan. Her daily schedule grew simple and deeply fulfilling. Weekdays were spent sorting canvas collections, coordinating with up-and-coming artists, designing gallery exhibition layouts, and writing descriptive blurbs for each displayed artwork. Evenings back at the penthouse were filled with quiet reading, self-taught oil painting practice, and simple homemade meals prepared in the open kitchen. Her chronic gastritis, triggered by years of stress and irregular skipped meals while catering to Ethan's schedule, ceased flaring up entirely, and her perpetually pale, exhausted facial complexion gradually softened into a gentle, healthy rose glow as her mental state stabilized. Tranquility did not last indefinitely, however. Ethan tracked her down at the gallery less than a week following her relocation. It was a busy weekday afternoon, and Chloe knelt on the gallery's hardwood floor, cross-referencing an inventory checklist with her co-worker when the glass front door slammed open hard enough to rattle the framed art hanging on the surrounding walls. Ethan stormed inside, clad in a custom black tailored suit, a suffocating aura of unbridled rage clinging to every inch of his frame as he cut straight through crowds of casual art patrons to reach Chloe's workstation. He snatched her slender wrist in a brutal, unyielding grip before she could stand fully upright, bloodshot irises blazing with unhinged desperation. "Enough of this childish rebellion," he snarled, loud enough for every guest and staff member within earshot to overhear. "Get in my car and come back to Azure Heights with me immediately." Chloe wrenched her arm free from his bruising grasp with all her strength, a vivid red ring blooming around her wrist where his fingers had dug into soft skin. She stepped backward to create safe distance, her voice calm and unshaken despite the dozens of curious, judging stares fixed on their confrontation. "Mr. Voss, I must ask you to cease this harassment. If you continue to accost me in a public commercial space, I will dial the local police department to file an official disturbance report." That single cool, unemotional retort struck Ethan like a physical blow. He froze rigid where he stood, his face draining to an angry, ashen shade of grey, jaw tight with suppressed fury. "You'd rather shack up with Silas Thorne than return to the life I provided you? Do you truly not comprehend how dangerous a man he is? He's only offering you shelter to weaponize you against my business operations." "Your corporate rivalries hold no bearing on my personal choices," Chloe replied flatly, returning her gaze to the art inventory spreadsheets laid across the floor to signal the conversation was over. "I've instructed my legal representative to mail a revised, fully updated divorce contract to Voss Industries corporate headquarters. Kindly review and sign the documents at your earliest convenience so we may finalize our legal separation without further confrontation." She turned her full attention back to her work after speaking, deliberately ignoring Ethan's rigid, bitter figure lingering beside her workstation. Beneath the table, her fingers curled tight into the paper checklist, creating deep creases in the printed pages as suppressed old grief briefly stirred within her chest. But she bit back any visible display of vulnerability, determined not to give him the satisfaction of witnessing her hurt in front of strangers. Ethan refused to surrender after that gallery incident. For days afterward, he parked his luxury sedan outside Nova Sky's main gate, each dawn to wait for her commute, loitered on the sidewalk outside Lumina Fine Arts, through every lunch break, and tailed her vehicle all the way back to the penthouse parking lot at closing time. Chloe consistently ignored every attempt at contact, never engaging in conversation or acknowledging his presence. This cycle persisted until one Friday evening as she stepped out of the gallery's front doors at sunset. Silas's black luxury sports car pulled up alongside the curb, the window rolling down to reveal his composed features as he tilted his head toward her. "Need a lift back to the penthouse?" Chloe climbed into the passenger seat without hesitation, settling into the leather upholstery as Silas eased the vehicle away from the curb. Through the rearview mirror, they both watched Ethan stand, rooted to the sidewalk, fists clenched at his sides, his glare burning holes into the retreat car's back windshield. Silas let out a quiet, dry whistle, the sound tinged with faint, dry amusement. Ethan's self-control leaves much to be desired, doesn't it? "Just drive, please," Chloe requested softly, not wishing to dwell on the man who had spent 3 years destroying her sense of self-worth. After that public display of her association with Silas, Ethan's stalking attempts slowed dramatically. Within 2 weeks, Ivy had fully moved into Azure Heights and occupied the secondary bedroom Ethan had renovated for her, consuming nearly all of his free time and diverting his obsessive fixation away from Chloe entirely. For the next 2 months, Chloe enjoyed uninterrupted peace, maintaining only casual elevator run-ins with Silas at the penthouse complex. Their fragile neutral neighbor dynamic shattered on one torrential, thunderous rainy night deep into autumn. Chloe had stayed late at the gallery to finish cataloguing a new shipment of artist canvases, rushing out the front doors without grabbing her compact foldable umbrella. Heavy sheets of cold rain soaked through her lightweight wool coat and long hair within seconds by the time she reached Nova Sky's lobby entrance. She boarded the private top-floor elevator car, and halfway up the building's shaft, the doors slid open on the 15th floor to admit Silas Thorne. He'd evidently spent the evening at a corporate charity gala, his formal dress shirt collar unbuttoned and silk tie loosely askew, a thick cloud of whiskey and faint cigarette smoke clinging to his clothing. His dark eyes appeared unfocused, clouded by the haze of heavy alcohol consumption as they locked onto Chloe's rain-soaked form. "Chloe?" he slurred quietly, recognizing her instantly despite his intoxicated state. "Mr. Thorne," she responded with reserved politeness, reaching out to press the button labeled for the penthouse level. The small enclosed elevator cabin filled with the clashing scents of his liquor-soaked garments and her damp, rain-dampened outerwear as the metal car continued its upward ascent. "He never treated you with an ounce of decency," Silas muttered out of nowhere, his voice low and gravelled from overindulgence. Chloe blinked in quiet surprise, unsure how to respond to such an unprompted, heartfelt observation, and remained silent, her gaze fixed on the reflective metal elevator floor beneath her sneakers. "Ethan Voss is a complete fool," a bitter, mocking huff escaped his lips. "He clutches a worthless glass pebble and mistakes it for a priceless pearl, blind to what he's thrown away. He deserves every hardship coming his way." The elevator chimed, signaling arrival at the top floor, and the double doors slid open. Chloe stepped out first, retrieving her front door keychain from her canvas tote bag as she prepared to unlock the penthouse entryway. Before she could twist the lock's cylinder, Silas stumbled forward a few unsteady paces and planted one large palm flat against the wooden door surface, blocking it from closing entirely and trapping her between the wall and his towering frame. The dim amber hallway overhead lighting stripped away Silas's usual cold, polished corporate mask, revealing raw, buried agony etched deep into his sharp facial features. Rain droplets dripped from the ends of his black hair down the defined line of his jaw, and his dark eyes swirled with layers of suppressed pain and desperate longing Chloe had never suspected lay beneath his ruthless business persona. "Chloe," he spoke slowly, each syllable heavy and labored, as if forcing a secret locked away for an entire decade up from his chest. 10 years ago, during the flash flood that swept through Brook Creek Village, there was a young girl screaming, soaked to the bone, nearly pulled under the raging river current. That girl was you, wasn't it? A violent rush of icy numbness swept through Chloe's entire body at those words, every drop of blood seeming to freeze solid in her veins. Long-buried, deliberately suppressed memories of that catastrophic storm flooded her mind unbidden. Murky brown floodwaters surging high around her waist, torrential pouring rain, raw, desperate sobs tearing from her throat, and a pair of adolescent hands scarred with scrapes and fresh lacerations that had locked tight around her arms, shoving her hard toward a riverbank boulder before the boy vanished into the raging current without a trace. That feral, wounded teenage boy who had risked his own life to save her. This man standing inches away in the rainy hallway was him. She stumbled backward, her spine colliding hard against the solid wooden doorframe, shock rendering her throat so dry she could barely form coherent speech. "You were the boy in the river back then?" Silas's mouth tugged into a bitter, self-deprecating smile as he released his grip from the door, his swaying frame betraying just how heavily the night's alcohol had impacted his balance. "I've spent 10 years scouring every town within a 50-mile radius of Brook Creek searching for you. When I finally tracked you down, you were already Ethan's wife." His gaze held hers captive, overflowing with tangled grief and quiet resentment. "I saw you wearing that crescent diamond locket at a corporate banquet, standing beside him with a soft smile, and I convinced myself you'd found a happy, safe life you deserved after everything you'd endured." That locket, Ethan's thoughtless one-year marriage anniversary gift, a gaudy piece of jewelry Chloe had loathed and locked away in her metal tin within days of receiving it. She had only worn it once to a mandatory corporate dinner years prior, and that single fleeting sight had spawned a decade-long misunderstanding between her and Silas. "That necklace was never mine to cherish," she rushed to explain, her thoughts spiraling into a jumble of confused questions about the village flood all those years ago. Silas appeared drained of all remaining energy to unpack the story that night, shaking his head faintly as he turned to stagger toward his own penthouse door on the opposite side of the hallway, fumbling clumsily with the digital keypad's numbered buttons. "Wait! Don't go," Chloe called out instinctively, desperate to learn the full truth about the boy who'd sacrificed himself to save her 10 years prior. He paused, with his back fully turned toward her, refusing to glance over his shoulder. "I survived the flood," his voice flattened back into its customary detached neutrality, all raw vulnerability sealed away behind a cold wall once more. "A group of herbalists traveling downstream pulled my unconscious body from the water. That's all there is to say." A thunderous slam echoed as he stepped inside his penthouse and closed the door, leaving Chloe alone in the empty corridor with a racing heart and a head full of unanswerable questions. She remained standing there for a long stretch of time, rain still dripping from her damp hair, distant thunder rumbling outside the tower's windows, replaying every fragment of that long-forgotten river disaster in her mind until dawn broke, without a single minute of sleep. The following morning, Chloe showed up at the elevator with heavy dark circles beneath her eyes, exhaustion weighing down every step as she prepared to head to the gallery. Silas entered the same car on the ground floor, his suit immaculately pressed, once again, hair neatly combed, only faint dark smudges beneath his eyes, hinting at a sleepless night mirroring her own. He offered a brief, civil nod, as though their emotionally charged rainy hallway confrontation had never taken place, and they rode upward in complete silence until the garage-level doors slid open. Before he could step out of the elevator car entirely, Chloe summoned the courage to voice the question burning inside her. During the Brook Creek flood 10 years ago, were there 2 young girls caught in the river's current alongside me? Silas's fingers paused mid-press on the elevator's exit button, his head rotating slowly to fix her with a deep, unreadable stare, like a quiet lake hidden beneath shadowed mountains. One girl wore a white sundress and carried an identical crescent locket around her neck. Chloe's stomach plummeted into a pit of cold dread as she absorbed his words. What happened to her after the flood receded? She was rescued by Ethan's father's traveling construction crew, Silas replied in a toneless, matter-of-fact monotone, no trace of personal emotion coloring his statement. The Voss family leveraged her false account of being the flood's savior to secure permanent trade partnerships with her wealthy overseas relatives, building Voss Industries into the corporate giant it is today. The elevator doors slid fully open to reveal the empty underground parking structure. Silas took 2 strides forward before halting again, his back still facing Chloe as he spoke without turning to meet her gaze. The river's waters were cold and muddy enough, but human greed and deception run far colder than any flood current. Take care of yourself from now on. With that final warning, he strode across the concrete parking lot to his sports car, the engine's low roar echoing through the garage as he drove away, leaving Chloe motionless where she stood, a wave of icy realization crashing over her mind. She had finally unraveled the core of the decade-long lie that had ruined 3 separate lives. Ethan had spent 10 years obsessing over the girl who'd supposedly pulled him from the floodwaters, yet the real young woman who'd clung to his side through the disaster had been Chloe all along. Ivy Mercer had merely stumbled upon Chloe's lost diamond locket after the storm and fabricated an entire heroic backstory to climb the social ladder into the Voss family's good graces. Over the next 7 days, Chloe quietly reached out to distant childhood acquaintances and leveraged subtle clues Silas had casually provided to piece together every unflattering detail of the 10-year fraud. Scanned copies of local Brook Creek newspapers from the flood year, audio recordings of elderly village residents recounting the true river events, witness statements documenting Ivy's brother's violent intimidation of anyone willing to expose their fabricated tale. All the evidence stacked neatly on her penthouse window ledge as she processed the crushing irony of everything that had transpired. Ethan had worshipped a counterfeit hero for a full decade, while tormenting the genuine girl who'd shared his terrifying flood ordeal. Silas had risked drowning to rescue her, only to watch her enter a loveless marriage with his biggest corporate rival, misled by a single stolen piece of jewelry. And Chloe herself had wasted 3 precious years of her youth playing a fake lover for a man who never once saw her authentic self beneath the imitation Ivy persona. The tangled web of deceit stretched far deeper than she'd ever imagined, and she resolved to lay every hidden truth bare for the entire city's elite social circle to witness at the upcoming Voss Industries charity gala. A soft knock on her penthouse door interrupted her sorting of evidence one evening, and when she pulled the door wide open, Silas stood in the hallway holding an embossed gold invitation card between his thumb and forefinger. Voss Industries is hosting their annual charity gala this Saturday night at the Summit Grand Ballroom, he explained as he handed the card over to her. It will be Ivy's first major public appearance since returning to the country. Ethan's arranged the entire event to parade her as his long-lost beloved. Would you care to accompany me as my guest? Chloe unfolded the glossy invitation to see Ethan Voss and Ivy Mercer's names printed side by side at the top, the sight making her lips curl into a calm, unburdened smile free of any lingering grief or resentment. "I'd be delighted to attend, Mr. Thorne. Are you in need of a date for the evening?" Silas's lips tugged upward into a slow, appreciative grin, his eyes glinting with quiet anticipation. "It would be my greatest honor to have you by my side." Saturday evening arrived, and the Summit Grand Ballroom dazzled beneath towering multi-tiered crystal chandeliers, thousands of tiny refracted lights bouncing off silk evening gowns and tailored designer tuxedos. Every prominent CEO, wealthy socialite, and regional business investor in the city packed the vast venue, crystal champagne flutes clinking together amid soft murmurs of polite small talk near the hors d'oeuvre tables. Ethan and Ivy stood shoulder to shoulder at the ballroom's main entrance to greet arriving guests. Painted as the tragic, long-separated romantic couple every attendee whispered about in hushed tones. Ivy wore an ivory floor-length couture gown, the identical crescent diamond locket fastened around her throat, her features fixed into a practiced soft, demure smile as she clung tightly to Ethan's arm to soak up every ounce of public admiration directed their way. Silas and Chloe arrived slightly later than the peak reception hour, and the moment they crossed the ballroom's marble entry threshold, the entire venue's collective chatter died down into an eerie, stunned hush. Hundreds of pairs of eyes locked onto their approaching figures, buzzing with shocked curiosity and quiet gossip, as every guest recognized the notorious rivalry between Silas Thorne and Ethan Voss, alongside the well-publicized breakdown of Chloe's marriage to Ethan. Chloe wore an emerald green velvet floor-length gown, custom-selected by Silas's styling team, clean minimalist cuts highlighting her delicate frame, a matching set of delicate diamond drop jewelry catching the ballroom's warm light against her pale skin. Her dark hair twisted loosely into a low, elegant chignon that exposed the smooth curve of her neck and collarbone, makeup soft and luminous, her expression bright and unapologetically self-assured, an unrecognizable contrast to the meek, subdued housewife Ethan had forced her to become over 3 years of marriage. Silas cut a towering, formidable figure in a jet-black bespoke tuxedo, his commanding aura parting crowds wherever they walked. He leaned his head down to murmur quiet, private commentary into Chloe's ear every few steps, and she tilted her chin upward to meet his gaze with genuine, unforced laughter, their easy, unscripted intimacy, plain for every onlooker to observe. Chloe could feel Ethan's furious, icy stare boring into her back from across the ballroom's main floor the entire time they mingled with mutual business associates. His knuckles whitened around the stem of his champagne glass, his jaw locked rigid as he watched her walk arm in arm with his most hated competitor, while Ivy's polished smile faltered, her fingers instinctively tightening their grip on Ethan's bicep as a flicker of anxious panic flashed across her face. Silas guided Chloe through the throng of corporate leaders with effortless poise, introducing her simply as his personal guest, without any vague, distancing language, ignoring all the sideways glances and whispered speculations swirling around them. Chloe remained fully aware Ethan's simmering rage would eventually boil over into a direct confrontation, and she waited patiently for him to make his move. Less than 30 minutes passed before Silas was pulled aside by a vital international investment partner for an extended private conversation, leaving Chloe standing alone near the ballroom's marble refreshment counter. Ethan seized the opening instantly, storming across the polished dance floor with his champagne glass clutched tight in one hand, the surrounding crowd automatically scattering to clear a path for his towering, enraged form. He halted inches away from Chloe, his voice lowered to a venomous snarl loud enough for nearby guests to overhear. "You went out of your way to attach yourself to Thorne just to get revenge on me? You're willing to debase yourself with a man everyone knows is ruthless and unethical, solely to hurt my feelings?" If this same harsh accusation had been hurled at her mere months prior, Chloe would have crumpled beneath the weight of his cruelty. Now, she only lifted her champagne flute and swirled the pale golden liquid inside, her tone cool and detached. Please maintain basic civility, Mr. Voss. My personal social life is none of your concern, and legally we are still bound by a marital contract. It strikes me as wildly hypocritical for you to fixate on my companionship when you parade Ivy around every high society function without a single thought toward my feelings. Ethan's temper exploded at her calm retort, his hand shooting out to clamp viciously around her wrist, his fingers digging deep into soft skin, hard enough to leave permanent bruising. I wield enough financial power to cripple every single Thorn Global partnership within 48 hours if I choose to act, he hissed menacingly. Do not test how far I am willing to go to separate you from him. Is that truly within your power? Chloe arched one subtle, unimpressed eyebrow, leaning forward to whisper, only loud enough for his ears to catch, reciting a list of his most devastating recent business losses, word for word. Your 3-year bid for the downtown commercial lot was stolen by a rival firm with a bid precisely $5 million higher. Your overseas renewable energy startup lost its entire core engineering team to mass resignations. 3 primary material suppliers terminated all exclusive distribution contracts with Voss Industries without advance warning. Ethan's pupils blew wide with unfiltered shock, his grip releasing her wrist instantly as all color drained from his facial features. You orchestrated every one of those corporate sabotages. I've never involved myself in industry rivalries, Chloe replied innocently, rubbing the bruised skin of her wrist as a faint, mocking smile played on her lips. Merely a friendly word of caution to watch your back in cutthroat business environments. He stared at her in utter disbelief, unable to reconcile the sharp, composed woman standing before him with the quiet, compliant spouse he'd spent 3 years underestimating. At that moment, Ivy hurried over to his side, her soft, performative tone dripping with artificial gentleness as she wrapped one arm around his torso. Ethan, what misunderstanding has come between you and Miss Hale? Nothing worth discussing, Ethan grunted, forcing himself to calm his raging temper, his glare never leaving Chloe's figure. Just reminiscing about old history, Chloe replied, letting her eyes drift pointedly down to the crescent locket hanging around Ivy's neck, the sarcasm thick in her voice. That locket on you has quite a distinctive design, suits your aesthetic well. I've always favored much simpler jewelry styles myself. Ivy's hand flew up to cover the diamond pendant protectively, her smile growing stiff and uncomfortable. It holds irreplaceable sentimental value to me. I can certainly see why that would be the case, Chloe said meaningfully, before nodding her head politely toward both of them. Excuse me, Mr. Voss, Ms. Mercer. Silas is waiting for me. She turned and walked unhurriedly back across the ballroom to rejoin Silas, who excused himself from his business conversation the instant he spotted her approaching, one arm sliding naturally around her waist to lead her toward the glass-walled outdoor rooftop terrace overlooking the city skyline. The balcony offered quiet separation from the gala's crowded chaos, a gentle autumn breeze drifting over the marble railings as Silas fetched a glass of warm spring water from the outdoor bar and handed it to her. He lit a thin cigar and rested his weight against the stone balustrade, embers glowing faint orange in the twilight haze. Did Ethan's little outburst satisfy his need to vent frustration? He's convinced I'm behind all of Voss's recent commercial misfortunes, Chloe admitted, wrapping both hands around the warm glass mug to ward off the terrace's light chill. Silas let out a low, dry laugh, exhaling a thin cloud of grey smoke into the night air. He's desperate for a scapegoat amid his company's mounting failures. None of those market moves were your doing, though. All strategic pressure on Voss Industries originated from my corporate division. Chloe lifted her gaze to study his sharp, shadowed profile through the wispy smoke. What motivated you to expend so many corporate resources targeting Voss Industries? There are two primary reasons. Silas extinguished the cigar butt in a stone ashtray before turning to face her fully, his dark eyes locking unwaveringly onto hers. First, standard cutthroat commercial competition. Voss has sabotaged dozens of my firm's projects for years without remorse. Second, 10 years ago during that flood, he laid claim to a rescue story that rightfully belonged to you, stealing the life you could have had for himself. Chloe nodded slowly in understanding. I owe you my gratitude for saving me during the flood, Silas. But there's still a great deal tangled up between our lives, corporate feuds, this decade-long fabricated lie. There is no room for but, Silas interrupted her gently, taking one step forward to close the space separating their bodies, warm breath fanning lightly over her forehead. My initial motives may have included pity and a decade of quiet longing, yet my feelings for you have shifted entirely over these past months. I have no intention of stepping back and letting you suffer alone any longer. Chloe's heartbeat skipped wildly within her chest, a flutter of unfamiliar warmth stirring deep beneath the layers of lingering trauma she'd carried for years. Before she could formulate a response, the terrace's heavy glass entrance door slammed open violently, Ethan charging out onto the rooftop with tears of unhinged rage pooling in his bloodshot eyes. "Chloe!" he roared, advancing rapidly toward the pair, his limbs shaking with unbridled fury. "You attached yourself to this cold-blooded tycoon purely to get even with me? Whatever wealth and status he can offer you, I can double tenfold. Come back to Azure Heights, and I'll overlook every misstep you've made since our separation." He reached out a hand to grab her forearm, only for Silas to move with lightning-fast reflexes, pulling Chloe securely behind his broad frame to shield her from Ethan's aggressive advance. Silas's voice dropped to a low, menacing timbre that carried unshakable authority across the entire terrace, every lingering guest's head snapping over to watch the confrontation unfold. "Control your conduct, Mr. Voss. You're frightening my partner and our unborn child." "Partner? A baby?" Ethan staggered backward 2 full steps, all color draining completely from his face, his gaze darting frantically down to Chloe's flat midsection in utter, disbelieving horror. "That cannot possibly be true. You're fabricating this to hurt me." Chloe watched his catastrophic breakdown with complete emotional detachment, no flicker of compassion stirring inside her chest. This was the man she'd loved blindly for 3 years, the man who had tossed her aside without mercy the moment his fake savior returned to town, and only now that he risked losing her permanently did he display any trace of regret. Silas's arm wrapped securely around her shoulders, his fingertips brushing soothingly over her upper arm in a quiet gesture of comfort that drove Ethan deeper into a spiral of jealous despair. "Ethan Voss," Chloe spoke clearly, projecting her voice so every onlooker on the terrace could hear every word distinctly. "Our marriage ended the night you tore up my divorce papers and insisted Ivy move into our shared home. There is nothing left between us worth salvaging." "No, there's still everything," Ethan shouted, veins bulging along his forehead, his voice cracking with hysterical remorse. "I only cared for Ivy out of misplaced gratitude. The woman I've spent years searching for is you all along." "Are you truly certain the girl who pulled you from that flood current was Ivy?" Chloe challenged him, a bitter, sorrowful smile tugging at her lips as she brought forth the scanned newspaper clippings and audio recording device from her small evening clutch bag. Let's lay this decade-long fraud out for every guest here to witness. Ivy had chased Ethan out onto the rooftop terrace in pursuit, and at those words, her face blanched chalk white, both hands flying up to clutch the crescent locket around her neck in blind panic. Silas stood calmly beside Chloe, one arm still wrapped around her waist as the crowd of gala guests circled closer to witness the shocking revelation unfolding before their eyes. Chloe held up the printed old newspaper copies for everyone to read and pressed play on the recorder, the gravelly, aged voice of an elderly Brook Creek villager echoing out across the silent terrace, recounting the full, unaltered flood story from 10 years prior. The audio laid bare Ivy's theft of the locket and her manufactured rescue narrative for all to hear, a collective murmur of shock rippling through the assembled elite crowd once the recording finished playing. Ethan whirled around to face Ivy, his gaze sharp and accusatory, demanding the unvarnished truth about the flood's events. Ivy dissolved into hysterical, tearful denial, spouting baseless accusations that Chloe had forged every piece of evidence out of jealous malice. Chloe proceeded to list irrefutable supplementary proof, witness testimony from village rescue workers, records documenting Ivy's brother's violent crimes, unexplained foreign wire transfers deposited into Ivy's bank accounts throughout her overseas education, and each new detail stripped away the last shred of Ivy's pristine white moonlight facade. The young woman's legs buckled beneath her weight, a waiter rushing forward to prop her upright as she collapsed into uncontrollable sobs. Ethan's shoulders sagged completely, every ounce of arrogant pride evaporating as he stared at Chloe with a devastating cocktail of crippling regret and soul-crushing realization. He finally recognized the fragmented flood memories he'd falsely assigned to Ivy as belonging to the woman standing before him, Chloe, the girl who had clung to his side through raging floodwaters all those years ago, the person he'd spent 3 years tormenting for the sake of a counterfeit savior. "It was always you," he whispered brokenly, tears streaming down his cheeks as he stumbled forward in a desperate attempt to close the gap between them. "It's far too late for apologies," Chloe responded flatly, no trace of sadness or mercy in her tone. She looped her arm firmly through Silas's and turned to walk away from the broken pair, leaving Ethan wallowing in endless remorse and Ivy publicly disgraced on the rooftop marble floor. Silas guided her through the hushed, parting crowds and out of the summit grand ballroom without glancing backward once. The cool autumn night air washed over them the instant they stepped outside the hotel's front entrance, clearing away the suffocating atmosphere of lies and humiliation that had permeated the gala venue. They climbed into Silas's black luxury sedan, and he did not immediately turn the ignition, instead shifting in his seat to study Chloe's soft, unguarded profile beneath the street lamp glow. "Do you harbor any regret over exposing every secret tonight? You could have leveraged this truth to extract vast financial concessions from Voss Industries." Chloe shook her head, her gaze drifting over the endless stretch of illuminated city high-rises visible through the passenger window. "I never desired wealth seized through blackmail. Falsehoods deserve to be brought into the open, regardless of what monetary gain I might have taken from them." She turned to face Silas directly, her expression warm and sincere as she voiced her quiet gratitude. "I'm thankful you protected me through all of this, even if your original motives were rooted in corporate rivalry against Ethan." Silas leaned slightly closer within the confined car interior, the clean, crisp scent of his sandalwood cologne wrapping gently around her senses. His fingers lifted to brush a stray strand of hair away from her cheek, skin warm against her temple. "If I told you my intentions toward you have never been tied to business retaliation, if every act of help stemmed solely from the urge to protect the girl I pulled from the river 10 years ago, would you believe me?" His dark eyes burned bright with unmasked vulnerability and quiet devotion, laying all his long-buried feelings bare before her without any hidden agenda. "I failed to hold on to you once amid that flood's chaos. I will not make that same mistake again. Allow me the chance to properly court you, with no ulterior motives, no corporate schemes weighing between us. Only Silas, wanting to care for Chloe Hale. Would you give us a chance?" Chloe's heart softened completely as she looked into his sincere, unguarded eyes, all lingering hesitation melting away. She gave him a slow, gentle nod, a quiet, genuine smile blooming across her lips. "I'd like to try." Silas's face lit up with brilliant, unfiltered joy, a soft laugh rumbling deep in his chest as he sat upright and twisted the car key in the ignition. The smooth sports car merged seamlessly into the evening highway traffic, the glowing silhouette of Summit Grand Ballroom shrinking smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror as they drove away from a decade of deception and pain. Ahead of them stretched an open, unwritten future, free of self-sacrificing heartbreak and false identities. Chloe Hale no longer needed to mold herself into someone else to earn love or safety. She had a fulfilling career, a fully restored sense of self-worth, and a man who had loved her quietly for an entire decade, waiting patiently for the chance to stand beside her authentic self. The tangled, tragic web of lies that had destroyed 3 lives had finally unraveled completely, each person forced to confront the bitter consequences of their own selfish choices. Ethan Voss's corporate empire would crumble under the weight of severed partnerships and public scandal, left drowning in lifelong regret over the irreparable damage he'd inflicted. Ivy Mercer lost every ounce of wealth, status, and social prestige she'd stolen through fabricated heroism, condemned to live out the rest of her days, stripped of the false identity she'd built her entire life upon. For Chloe and Silas, however, the night marked the end of every sorrowful chapter, and the hopeful beginning of a life built entirely on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine, unshaken affection.